Anyway, I'm Jeff Mayers from WisPolitics.com. Thanks for coming to the September edition of the WisPolitics luncheon at the Madison Club. You know, we don't usually do these on Friday, but when you have a special guest like Senator Baldwin, you fill the room, 100+ people. So let's hear it for you guys. All right. Over the century mark. So I want to thank our sponsors, first of all, Walmart, ARP Wisconsin, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Hush Blackwell Strategies, with us from the beginning with our event series here, American Family Insurance, and Xcel Energy. So Senator, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to be home. We had a busy week. We have one coming up too, out in DC, but it's great to be home for the weekend.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, I'm sure that you will want to always start your weekends with WisPolitics. So.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't you?
So it's a good day for Senate Democrats because so far none of them are mentioned in Mitt's book. So far, yes. So Mitt Romney is saying he's not running for re-election, and there's also a biography coming out in which he's saying some juicy tidbits about his Republican colleagues. But at any rate, you have done some things with Mitt Romney, and you were telling me a little bit about how he was helpful in one respect for the Respect for Marriage Act.
Absolutely. So I sit on one committee with Mitt Romney, and that's the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. I find him to be a very valuable member, and very good to work with. But I know we're going to talk about the consequence of the Dobbs decision in a moment, but let me just touch on that quickly, because it was the Dobbs decision last summer that not only overturned Roe versus Wade, but also had implications for a number of other issues, including access to contraception and the validity of interracial and same-sex marriages, because they were all decided using similar legal reasoning. And in fact, if it weren't clear enough from reading the majority opinion, if you read Justice Thomas's concurring opinion, he went right after those and he said, perhaps these cases should come back before this Supreme Court for review. And we felt it very important to try to secure these additional rights through legislation to protect contraception access, or executive actions to do the same, and through pressing the Respect for Marriage Act. As everyone in this room knows, you need 60 votes to pass legislation in the Senate, not just a simple majority of the 100 senators. And so we had strong support for the Respect for Marriage Act on the Democratic side, but we needed to get at least 10 Republicans on board, and I would say more than that, because nobody wants to be viewed as the deciding vote, like your vote was the deciding vote. So you need a couple more, and we ended up through a lot of hard work with 12 Republican votes and being able to pass that legislation last fall, signed into law last December. But the work with Mitt Romney opened the door to the opportunity to actually work with the Church of Latter-day Saints. They had looked at the legislation and wanted some clarification. And we did a lot of listening and a lot of work to provide the clarity that members would need to sign on. And we made some modifications, but through that work that Mitt Romney really assisted with, we ended up not only with the endorsement of the bill by the Church of Latter-day Saints, but also the Christian Colleges and Universities Organization, Orthodox Jews. I mean, the religious community endorsements of the bill, and I'm not saying staying neutral, I'm saying endorsing the bill outright, was heartwarming, and Mitt Romney played a really significant role in helping us get to that point, and helping us get 12 Republicans to join all Democrats in passing the Respect for Marriage Act.
Okay, so you foretold what we're going to talk about next, but the big news in Wisconsin yesterday, amongst other things, was Wisconsin Planned Parenthood saying they're going to resume abortions starting on Monday. And there's still kind of murky law, so I'm wondering what you think of that move in terms of what the situation is in Wisconsin and around the country.
Yeah, so when the Dobbs decision came down, a lot of people looked immediately at the law that was passed in 1849 and viewed that as a criminal abortion ban. And I can tell you in talking to folks who have been affected in life-altering ways by the lack of comprehensive reproductive care in this state, this was very, very serious. I know of any number of stories now of people really being in severe health circumstances before they could get the care they needed. And so this is welcome news. What I understand about the interpretation of the 1849 law, 1 year after statehood, is that at the trial court level, they have indicated that they believe that law was passed for other purposes and doesn't apply in this modern context. I'm sure that will continue to be explored in court, but that is the basis that I understand Planned Parenthood is moving forward. But I do want to say, from the federal perspective, as a United States Senator, I'm the lead author of the Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify Roe versus Wade into our federal laws and take the additional step of telling states like Wisconsin, like Texas, like Florida, that you can't pass state-level laws that encumber those basic rights to access. And I'm still going to persist with that measure, regardless of what plays out in the state of Wisconsin, because we cannot have a patchwork of state-to-state regulation that means that women don't have the same rights in one jurisdiction than they do in another. And to see last year half of America have fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers had was shocking. And we have to continue this fight at the federal level. Okay,
and so I think evidence of what's going on in Wisconsin was there was this report out, I can't remember the name of the institute, but they showed that how many, the rate of increase in abortions in Illinois, right? So, you know, that's from people from Wisconsin, obviously, right? It is. Yeah, and so, I mean, so some states are able to, some people are able to afford to do that, right? But not everybody can, so that's why you want to eliminate the patchwork.
Absolutely, and you know, in the case of these crises that people do experience, and you know, it's important to sort of name some of these, but a miscarriage where the best practice isn't followed in Wisconsin because of that law. And you know, I talked to a young woman from Eau Claire who didn't get treatment until her fever was close to 102. And then they said, well, her life is in danger. But we shouldn't have a situation in the state of Wisconsin where that's the only basis on which you can get care in this state.
Okay, so you want to codify Roe v. Wade,
Yes.
But of course it would have to pass the Senate and pass the House and then go to the President. So that's not going to pass the House in the next 2 years. So what other things can be done, or what other things are you doing to in this arena that maybe could pass both houses?
Well, there are a number of efforts that are underway. It really looks at the entire scope of things. So let's take one example of executive action, and that is the way that the military is dealing with this issue. Service members do not get to choose where they are deployed. So they could be deployed to a state or a foreign country for that matter that doesn't provide comprehensive reproductive care. And the military has decided that it will pay for travel and there will be leave granted to secure health care that isn't available in the state or country where the service member is deployed. And that is an example of something that has been done. The Coast Guard has followed suit to create that policy for folks for our coasties. And the executive branch has done a number of things in order to deal with this patchwork quilt situation that we have post-Dobbs. But there are many legislative proposals out there too regarding contraception access. The federal government has recently declared that one type of medication contraception can be made available over the counter without prescription. We are now trying to make sure that there will be health care coverage for that prescription or for that over-the-counter medication. That's another effort that's underway. A really interesting aspect of this is the medical training that doctors get. Currently in Wisconsin, there's the belief that you cannot train fully an obstetrician gynecologist, and so if you want to be certified that you've had full training, that you actually must go to, for example, Illinois to get that training to be fully certified. And so trying to look at how to cover those expenses, both for the travel, but also for the institution that is going to provide that training. There are so many facets to this that we're working on, you know, travel, you raised it yourself. Before the announcement on Thursday, there's many who are trying to be able to travel to Illinois to access the care that they need. And how a lot of people can't afford that. So trying to make sure there's travel funds available.
Okay, so we're going to move on here now. So going back in D.C. now, the drama in D.C. So are we headed for a government shutdown?
Well, certainly I hope not. Government shutdown serves no one. If we look back to the repercussions in 2013 and 2018, you know, it's working families and service members and small businesses that are hurt by this. And I want to put a spotlight on both houses of Congress for a moment, because we're actually really, really proud in the Senate right now of how we're handling this issue. So back in the spring, we got on the cusp of defaulting on our debt. This is, of course, dealing with past spending decisions, not current spending decisions. But in order to avert a default, we saw the negotiation between Speaker McCarthy and Joe Biden to come to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which was passed in both houses by a bipartisan basis. Fiscal Responsibility Act deals with spending moving forward. So I'm on the Senate Appropriations Committee. I'm very proud to serve this year with new leadership that says we're going to get the job done, and we're going to do it with regular order and in a timely basis. In July, we reported all 12 of our bills through committee on overwhelmingly bipartisan votes. Overwhelmingly bipartisan votes. I chair the subcommittee that funds the Labor Department, the Education Department, and the Health and Human Services Department, a huge piece of federal activity. It passed with just 2 dissenting votes. So we have all of our bills queued up for floor consideration, and in fact, this week, we took up 3 of them as a package. Transportation and housing, military construction and the VA, and agriculture and the FDA. Again, big, important pieces of legislation that passed unanimously out of the Appropriations Committee. We're queued up with a short extension of time after the end of the fiscal year, at the end of this month. If we could just have a short continuing resolution, we can report all of our bills through and do it in the most orderly way that we've seen in years, many, many years. Now, that's the spotlight on the Senate. The House, wow. It is my sense that the headline of the opening of a baseless impeachment inquiry last week in the House was the deal perhaps that Leader McCarthy cut so that we could avert a government shutdown.
Well, except the defense bill didn't come out of...
Except that the defense bill crashed and burned, right? Which is, usually the easiest for both houses to deal with in many ways. But that said, he has the most unenviable position around in Washington. There were 15 ballots that took place in the beginning of this year just for him to become Speaker, because there was division within his caucus, which only has a slim majority in the House. What we are hoping and working towards is to set an example on the Senate side. We have for them to review bills that will pass the Senate on extraordinarily bipartisan bases. Leader McCarthy is going to have to figure out that the only way to get things done, if he relies only on his own caucus, he can't even pass a defense bill. But if he decides to govern with Democrats and Republicans, he can do what the Senate is doing, and that's what I would strongly suggest.
Okay, so, from Wisconsin, when people watch these things, the debt ceiling debate and the shutdowns, it's sort of like, I think most people are like mystified, like, really, that's, isn't there a better way, or is there a way to legislate to avoid having these mini crises? Because it's like, what's the point?
Certainly the answer is yes. They just, the politics is what stops it. There has been at times, even Mitch McConnell calling for a different way of dealing with the debt ceiling. How about having the president of whatever party adjust, and then Congress can object, rather than Congress needing to be the body that acts to approve that. So I certainly think there could be bipartisan agreement on the Senate side to do that. But whatever party is in power tends to enjoy the leverage that this opportunity gives them. And so I think that's why you haven't seen a prudent suggestion like that ever become law. I would say, likewise, in Wisconsin, we have an example of what to do if you had hit the end of the fiscal year and you haven't yet processed a new budget. The old one just keeps on staying in effect. There's no government shutdown in Wisconsin. We could do something similar to that at the federal level. But again, it's the leverage that the majority party in the House, in this case, wants to exercise and to extract something. But the pain it causes is for all of us in Wisconsin, small businesses, service members, working families. They bear the brunt of this. And I think we should be very clear-eyed about who's at fault, why this happened. And okay. I hope it doesn't still.
Okay,
I don't want to sound that pessimistic.
Okay.
I hope it still doesn't happen.
Okay. All right, so a lot of big bipartisan bills passed and through this Congress, and the president signed them, and they're billions and billions of dollars, and they're massive bills, and they're kind of hard to grapple with. But I think there's a sense of like, okay, and there are announcements being made about, an initiative for manufacturing chips is happening, and where other projects are happening. I'm wondering, I think there's a sense like, is Wisconsin doing what it needs to do to take advantage of all this federal money? This is like once in a generation type of money that's going for research and all these other things. I guess you can debate whether it's too much or whatever, but it's there and it's coming. So is Wisconsin doing enough to get its fair share, I guess?
Yeah, well, let me start with just the context setting. You talked about the CHIPS bill, but I would point to three major pieces of legislation that passed in the last few years that we're seeing the results of here in the state of Wisconsin. Let's start with the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I'm just going to say this, I call it the bipartisan infrastructure law all the time. Sadly, in Wisconsin, there was not one Republican member of our congressional delegation that supported it. So I'm not going to start calling it the Democratic Infrastructure Law just for Wisconsin, but I just want to mind you that it was it was a bipartisan effort, and I'm very proud we were able to pass it. And it, like other bills, unfold over multiple years. And it deals with roads and bridges. It deals with water infrastructure. And it deals with broadband deployment and some other areas. And Wisconsin, we are going to make sure, gets its fair share of those resources over the course of the bill. Now there's a few, I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a big bridge program that isn't going to be allocated by formula. It's going to go to some of the mega projects that are out there. We have a bridge in far northern Wisconsin that connects Superior with Duluth, the Blotnick Bridge. You might have remembered the president came to see the Blotnick Bridge after his State of the Union address in 2022 to say, this is an example of what we want. We haven't gotten the grant yet. And so I can tell you I am fighting very hard. Secretary Buttigieg will never have a conversation with me without my mentioning the Blotnick Bridge. And we're very hopeful it will be successful. So some are formulas, some are special projects that we are fighting for. In the CHIPS and Science Act, there's three bills I want to say. The CHIPS and Science Act, and then the third is the Inflation Reduction Act. And I will say for my focus on all of these, it has been to include Buy America provisions, so that we can bring some of the jobs in manufacturing that have been lost over decades back. And let me give you a clear example of that that has to do with the infrastructure bill and Buy America policies. I was in Kenosha a couple weeks back at a company called Sanmina. They do circuitry. The Secretary of Commerce, because of the strong Buy America policies, was able to have a conversation with the CEO of Nokia, a company based in Finland, to say, we really want your circuitry and your components as we build out broadband for every household in America. But you don't make it in America. And at first he sort of said, well, that's not our business model, and we hope you still buy our circuitry. She said, no, you really have to build it and make it in America. And so at Sanmina, with the CEO of Nokia present, we announced the doubling of jobs and the doubling of the footprint so that they can produce the Nokia IP, the circuitry, for our build out of broadband across America. These are great examples of how these jobs bolster manufacturing. But I want to get to the tech hubs, which I think you were.
Right, yeah, well, I'm going to say, you know, there is an effort here, a coalition that you're assisting to do the tech hub. That's under the CHIPS Act, right?
That's under the CHIPS and Science Act, exactly. So one of the things that we got into that bill, and it came through the Commerce Committee on which I sit, and this was, I want to give a little bit of history. Immediately, I think it was 2019, the Brookings Institution looked at cities across America and said, looked at their assets and said these would be like amazingly well-positioned places to do a hub of activity, because it has both the innovation, the research institutions, as well as other assets like the ability to scale up and commercialize something. Madison was number one. Milwaukee was not far behind in the top 20. And so I kept getting Wisconsinites saying to me, you need to take this Brookings Institution study and actually fund something in this bill to create tech hubs. And so we knew already Wisconsin had the assets. The question was, what sort of proposal would we put in? And I can't tell you how excited I am about the proposal we have put forth relating to personalized medicine, that rests upon the research that we're doing at our universities, the spin-offs that have done amazing things, and then our manufacturing and automation in manufacturing capacity. It's a consortium of 15 public and private entities, and it includes workforce training, so it includes the technical colleges in the state. It is so exciting, and now, I'm pressing the administration to select our application as one of about 20 tech hub designations that we're hoping to see in this state, in this country. So this is a really exciting opportunity, not just for jobs, but for the breakthroughs that this could make. We could end cancer as we know it. We could make inroads into fighting Alzheimer's. All of these proposals have great hope and opportunity and potential, and so I'm just very excited about our Tech Hub application.
Yeah, but do you think Wisconsin, Wisconsin's a purple state, that certainly helps, I think, get everybody's attention. But is Wisconsin, sometimes it seems like Ohio, maybe because of its, the auto manufacturing and the high-end manufacturing there, maybe is getting some more of the manufacturing stuff. I mean, are we doing enough, do you think, as a state and the business community to really marshal the resources to get more resources, match the money,
And so let me mention the third bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, which has incredible investments in clean energy and approaching a transformation to greater reliance on clean energy. I visited Ingeteam in Milwaukee and Franklin Energy here in the Madison area, who are on the cusp, are producing EV chargers. Between the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, we intend to deploy 500,000 EV chargers across the country to prepare for this transition. And Wisconsin manufacturers are on the front end of that. Harley-Davidson announced, they have now a spin-off, Livewire. They're going to produce electric motorcycles. And that production is going to be in part in Wisconsin, but the rest in the US. And that's an exciting, and so we're seeing it sometimes not like Intel saying, I'm going to be here, but by the way, Microsoft just announced that they're going to be here, and that's super exciting. But we're seeing it sometimes with small business opportunities, sometimes with medium or large size business opportunity, and I'm feeling very, very excited about those potentials.
Okay, so I want to talk about China and the relationship with China. So under the Trump administration, we had, there was a trade war with China and a lot of high-end rhetoric on that. And then I think the feeling was Biden was going to come into office and some of that was going to cool down. But in reality, he pretty much continued a lot of the same things without, I think, a lot of the same rhetoric, right? And then comes, in these bills, there's the stated effort of the CHIPS Act really is part of it is to counter Chinese influence. So I guess I'm wondering, do you agree with the, I guess, the rein in China philosophy of, the Biden administration and where these bills are going?
Yeah. And two major answers to that question. I want to start with just the awareness that was raised during the pandemic of what happens when there is a global demand and we don't manufacture what is in demand. The masks. 3M, I think, had a small operation, but we couldn't get the respirator type masks that were needed because we didn't make them here. The supply chain issues became very apparent when the big automakers at the time made an assessment that during the pandemic, car sales would slow. Mm-hmm. And so the chips manufacturers said, well, what's going to increase? Who's our customers? And they decided video games. That during a pandemic, there would be an uptick in demand. It takes about 6 months, as I understand it, to sort of shift production from one type of a chip to another in a fab. And all of a sudden, we had the lines of the major American auto manufacturers come to a halt because they didn't have chips. I visited farm implement dealers or manufacturers here in Wisconsin where they had fabricated the entire piece of equipment, but they couldn't send it to the customer because the control panel hadn't come yet. That is what I think gave us such a wake-up call to really invest in reshoring some of the critical supply chains that we rely on, right? So I don't think all of this came from a long-term animosity. It came from need, dire need, and we can't forget those lessons too quickly. So reshoring some of that is really critical to private sector as well as the public sector. Now let's go back in history. I was in the House of Representatives when the matter of whether we should normalize our trade relations with China came up as an issue. I voted no. I voted no in part because I did not see a level playing field. I saw state-subsidized enterprises there. I saw not a capitalist or free market system. And I feared that it would harm our workers. Wisconsin's a state that makes things. I know sometimes we're here in Madison and we don't think about that manufacturing sector that we have. We've made things. I did Harley Davidson, A.O. Smith. We make ships on the Great Lakes. I mean, we make things here. And I thought that there would probably be a decline as multinational corporations said, let's move our production to places where it would be cheaper because maybe the state subsidizes it or the labor laws don't prevent forced labor or child labor. I mean, these were serious issues that we were thinking about when this matter came before, and I voted no. But, of course, it passed. And so I've spent a lot of time since then trying to pursue policies that level the playing field for Wisconsin workers and Wisconsin businesses so that they can thrive with fair competition, not unfair competition. And there's a lot, and then, then there's, I said two things, but I'll do the third. There is a security level that we need to be concerned about, and that has many dimensions. Cybersecurity, I think, is chief among them.
So should we fear China?
I think we need to engage, and I think you've seen steady decline of tensions since, since our envoy John Kerry went to meet his counterpart on climate issues, since Secretary Raimondo went to speak to commerce issues, and frankly raised many of the, if we have a level playing field, we welcome China as a trading partner, but we are going to be looking at whether it is a level playing field. I think a number of these engagements, Blinken, et cetera, have been positive, and I'd like to see that trajectory continue. I think it's very dangerous when we're not engaging at all. And then, of course, I don't want to spend too much time focusing on Taiwan, but that's always a sort of underlying issue out there. What are China's future plans with regard to Taiwan?
Okay, so this isn't a frivolous question because you're actually signed on to a bill about it, but politicians have been beating up on TikTok because of its Chinese ownership and the cybersecurity issue. You signed on to the Restrict Act. I think you told me that's not necessarily a anti-TikTok thing, or
yeah,
explain.
So,
I guess explain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the Restrict Act sets up an interagency sort of review group, if you will, to be able to look at technology and assess some risk. One of the things I'd like to beef up in the bill is education about the risk. So not to tell somebody who uses the platform TikTok, you can't, as they tried to do, I guess, in Montana.
Yeah, right.
But instead to say, these are the risks you're taking. I know a lot of young people who assume that their personally identifying information is already possessed not only by entities in the US, but entities all over the globe. And they're like, when you tell them that you know, your personal identifying information might be in the hands of the People's Republic of China, they're like, I assume it already is, right? But what this does is analyze not just TikTok, but all sorts of hardware and software for risk, and then makes recommendations. So it's a process. But I'm going to give you a quick example that I experienced. And that is, it was one of those smart door entry things. So you go and there's a camera, and you punch in your code, but you download the app so you can set your code to begin with. And for safety, it shows you everyone who's ever come up to the door, time-stamped and date-stamped, etc. And it was like, oh, this is such cool technology, it keeps me safe. And then I looked, where was the software and hardware developed? China. Is that data that's hooked up to the internet going there? And are they able to track the activities of people they might want to be tracking?
You know we're being watched right now by Xi.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. But anyway, so getting back to the Restrict Act, it does an assessment, which I think is so critical, because I'd like to know if I'm purchasing a smart thermostat or a smart whatever, where that data's going.
Okay, so it's not TikTok specific.
Very much not TikTok specific, but TikTok certainly would be something they would look at in terms of the potential of the data and content that people upload into TikTok. Is the US-based TikTok sending it back? And there's every reason to believe, I think, that there is, but I'd like to hear it from this commission. I'd like to get this bill passed and have a studied look at all sorts of things. And again, way beyond the platform TikTok, all these other smart devices that we have.
Yeah. Sorry to be stuck on TikTok, but I mean, you mentioned the younger folks, and I'm just wondering, okay, so they're sort of blasé about it. So it's sort of like, do they like react like, well, why is government butting in to if I like my TikTok, well then, so what, right? I mean, did you get that?
When I think, when the House, and I think somebody did in the Senate too, but the House had the first bill to just ban TikTok.
Right.
And I certainly heard from a lot of constituents that, that this would be, they would be very angered by that approach.
Okay, so you didn't support a ban. This is the alternative.
I think this is the smart alternative.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, I never thought we'd be talking about TikTok at the WisPolitics luncheon, but here we go. We got it covered. All right, so let's go out to audience questions, and I wanted to call on my friend Penny Klein from the Middleton area. I know Penny, and I talked to her earlier, and she wanted to say something and ask you a question.
First of all, I wanted to say I'm a diabetic. A few years ago, I was spending $4.50 a month on 2 insulins. Thanks to Tammy, I'm only spending $35 a month on each, so $70 a month at this point. And without Tammy's help and work for the reduction in the prescription drugs, that was a huge hit to me. And so I'd like to say thank you.
Thank you.
And also, I'd like to ask what's going on in the future now with the other prescription drug costs.
Great.
With the First Lady that was mentioned, and if you tell folks about that. But again, if it weren't for her.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny. I
Yeah, so
appreciate
what
that.
is, that Penny's question, I'm going to repeat it since you weren't mic'd up there, but what about, thank you for helping reduce the monthly cost of insulin, which is capped in the IRA. But then also, then what is the status of the Medicare negotiations on drugs? And there's a big lawsuit out there from, I think, Merck on that, and so that may be a deciding factor. So anyway.
First, let me talk about the insulin because I think it's very much related. In the Inflation Reduction Act, we made a number of changes for folks who are on Medicare. We tried to do it for everybody, but fell short of votes in order to reduce the out-of-pocket costs for those on insulin. But we were successful with regard to capping at no more than $35 per month insulin out-of-pocket fees. When we did that, a short while later, Eli Lilly, one of the major insulin manufacturers, voluntarily agreed to lower the price to no more than $35 out of pocket for everybody. To me, that is an example of the ripple effect we will see when we negotiate with the big pharmaceutical companies to lower the price of a whole new set of prescription drugs. I believe we'll see a ripple effect that benefits everyone, even if you have not yet attained the golden age when you are Medicare eligible. Just 2 weeks ago, the administration announced the first 10 medications that are going to be the subject of negotiation. They range from things to treat heart disease to blood cancers and many other health issues. And I'm really excited and also frustrated that it's going to take a little bit longer than I would like, but I'm glad that they are going to begin these negotiations and that in the years to follow we will add more and more medications. Just know that this is what every other industrialized country does to secure lower prices. And we're the outlier that has never done that. I think in addition to Merck, there's going to be, I think, a number of drug companies that have joined a lawsuit. I certainly hope it fails. I haven't followed the timetable for that case, but I hope that we actually conclude some of the negotiations prior to it being heard, so that just the weight of success is in the background when those cases are litigated. But this is so long overdue. The reason we didn't negotiate, Medicare didn't negotiate prior, was because it was forbidden in law. And we finally were able to repeal that law. So I am excited about the opportunities. I forgot to mention, for seniors now, most vaccines are free of copay. And we hope that that will significantly increase the vaccination rate for important things, not just flu and COVID, but also things like shingles and RSV and other things that are dangerous for the health of seniors in particular.
Okay, so your hope in this, there's only 10. But
Start with.
Right, but your hope is that this will set a template then for all drugs manufactured in the U.S.? What if they're manufactured outside the U.S.?
Oh, this negotiation is happening globally.
Okay, so if it doesn't matter whether it's made here or made abroad.
Correct.
Okay, but you're hoping for, again, set the template for many, many, many more drugs, not just 10.
Right, and as these negotiations proceed, what's really important is the transparency involved. Because once you know what Medicare is going to pay, I can rest assured that Blue Cross Blue Shield and United and all of these, they're going to use their clout to secure the same for everyone else.
Right. What about pharma's argument that innovation happens because a new drug has to be expensive? It costs so much to develop it. I mean, what goes into that? They have to recoup their costs, we had this discussion before generics became widely available. But
I
mean,
welcome that question. So first of all, the companies have always refused to be transparent about what do we spend on R&D, what do we spend on advertising. When you see those ads and then they say very rapidly could cause these side effects, blah, 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 blah. What do they allocate for stock buybacks? What do they allocate for worker compensation and executive compensation? They've never been transparent about that. And so when you say that negotiating might impact R&D, I suspect that we would find R&D to be a fairly small piece of that larger puzzle, right? And then secondly, I think we really need to have transparency on when taxpayer-funded research has contributed to then the spin-offs. And look at the COVID vaccine. It was government-funded research that led to that mRNA, that's a mouthful, vaccine platform. So yes, the company should recoup their value added, but let's have some insight, some visibility, some transparency on the role that we as taxpayers played in these breakthroughs. I have a bill that actually made it through committee, but it's not yet on the floor, that would require, if a company wanted to increase the price of their medication, that they provide that transparency as sort of justification.
Okay, so over here. Hello?
Yes. Sean's on your side.
That's okay, I'd rather have the question.
Senator, so the hearing this week on artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Very much an interest for American Family Insurance. We do a lot in the technology space. It seems that there may be a glimmer of hope that because there's such a lack of understanding about AI that there may be an opportunity for progress in some kind of regulation around it. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So we're referring to a spectacular hearing that we had on Capitol Hill on the Senate side, sponsored by 4 senators, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, who have been watching the leaps forward in the development of artificial intelligence platforms with both excitement and alarm, and recognizing that there is a role for government. And so this was a really high-profile panel of folks who came to speak with us to actually sort of say what they believe the role of government might be in the development of these, in the development of AI. To give you a quick sampling, we had Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, we had Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, Facebook, we had Elon Musk on our panel of X and Tesla, we had Brad Smith filling in the afternoon for Microsoft. For those of you who don't know, he's from Appleton, Wisconsin, and so it was great to have a Wisconsinite on the panel. But we also had folks who would be from labor, who would be, members would be impacted, perhaps displaced by the development of AI, and a number of civil rights leaders who want to point out that if you, that there may be inherent bias in AI for a different reason, you know, in healthcare or in other, in finance, that we need to be aware of and perhaps have some additional regulation about. Every witness saw a role for government. If nothing else, I think the basic agreement was being able to label AI so that you know when you're seeing an image, reading an essay, watching a video, whether this is real people or artificial intelligence produced imitation, right? So getting a labeling, and then also these platforms, these companies that are developing AI, to have it maybe standardized so that Microsoft doesn't have one way of labeling and identifying, and Tesla has another, and Microsoft has a third, et cetera. I also think there was probably a fair amount of proposal that we look at the application in different industries differently, that it'll be difficult to have a lot of one size fits all, but there can be, at least with the labeling side, something along those lines. And then there's also the very practical applications of AI to make work and life easier. And then there's the civilization disrupting potential for AI that Elon Musk actually talked about a fair amount, and making sure that that never gets out of control, that there is always a human element to it is critical. And how we go about that, we don't know yet, but I think it was eye-opening. Over 70 senators out of 100 participated in all or part of this hearing. And I think our learning curve is steep, but we're serious about it. This was actually the 4th such hearing on AI, the first one being a professor from MIT who gave us Artificial Intelligence 101 in lay terms. So we have a learning curve on this, and I think it's really important. And I want to say that we have failed with regard to social media platforms and curtailing some of the harm we've seen there. And so we feel very strongly that we must not fail on this.
So is that a this session thing or a future session thing? Because it seems like a pretty big thing to do in the remaining months.
My hope would be that we could at least advance legislation that deals with the labeling and the clear identification of artificial intelligence generated products. I'll give you a quick example of why I might have hope that this could happen this session. We have an election coming up next year.
Yeah, well, I heard about that.
And I think there's a lot of folks that are terrified that these, what are they called, deep fakes, or
yeah.
that images of somebody purporting to say something that is actually derived through artificial intelligence might start to be deployed. And in a way that would be hard to claw back. And I think that there are people who fear that on both sides of the aisle. And that may give a little bit of extra incentive to at least deal with the labeling part.
In the back there, why don't you stand up and shout it out? Oh, no, back there. And then we can come to you, ma'am. Yeah, shout it out a little bit.
Bill O'Brien, I'm one of your constituents from Milwaukee. I was excited when you talked about the tech hubs, and in particular how they may contribute to ending cancer as we know it. And that's what our mission is. I'm on the National Board of American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I know you've been involved intimately with regard to issues such as championing a new multi-cancer detection test, as well as educating the public with regard to palliative and hospice care. My question is, in your role on the Appropriations Committee,
Yes.
how will you continue to champion the proposed increase in cancer research and prevention funding in the labor HHS bill as Congress approaches the end of this fiscal year?
All right, well, there's a direct lobbying question for you. Anybody?
Well, I have great news. I have great news on that account. So we were talking earlier about.
Partisan, by the way, lobbying.
That's right. So let me just give you the great news and then what we have to do in order to move ahead. So I talked about the Fiscal Responsibility Act that was passed to avert a default on our debt. That set a spending cap for us in each of our appropriations bills that was slightly below what we spent last year. Wow, how do you up our highest priorities in that environment? highest priorities being research on cancer and Alzheimer's, highest priorities being an approach that's successful on dealing with our mental health crisis and our substance use disorder crisis and our child care struggles. All of those priorities we reflected with increasing our funding in the Senate Labor HHS education bill. Yes, we had to make some painful cuts in other areas. We also were able to recoup some unspent money from prior years in order to do that. But I did not want, in my first year with the gavel of that subcommittee, to be the one to say we either level fund or reduce funding for NIH in the areas of cancer and Alzheimer's and mental health. And we have been successful, and we're very proud of that. If we were to follow what the House has done in their bill, it would be devastating to the research and treatment capacity in the United States. And it's another reason why I hope at the end of the day, through our very bipartisan process, that our bills will become law versus those that have been produced in a very partisan fashion in the House of Representatives.
Okay, so you stood up before, so I'm sorry if my pointer didn't come to you directly. So you're on.
I think that we have a housing crisis in this country. I don't know how many people are homeless, maybe as many as 1 million, but there are millions more who are housing unstable. And I read articles from the West Coast to the East Coast to Chicago about big corporations buying up large swaths of housing and then jacking up rents. I've also recently read about big corporations buying up rural land. And I think this is a major concern for the country. When people are so housing unstable, they're constantly moving, you cannot create community. And I think this is just dangerous to the nation. And I think we need to look at what corporations are doing. I know that early in the foundation of this country, corporations weren't allowed to exist for more than a few years. With the Citizens United decision, it's a huge
Okay, so what?
issue, but I'm concerned about what's happening, particularly with how people are just moved around like chess pieces.
Okay, so let's come to a question then. What do you?
Is there anything we can do about it? Is there anything
Yeah, so let me talk first about the trend we've seen in mostly private equity firms purchasing large numbers of properties. This is, in Wisconsin, we're seeing it mostly in Milwaukee. And I won't even say flipping those houses, but because I'm not sure there's a lot of investment in improvement of the conditions, but then renting them. It's nice when your landlord is nearby, right? And you can ask for repairs, et cetera. So we're seeing, I'm seeing a lot of great concern, particularly in the Milwaukee area, with regard to these companies buying up significant numbers of properties. On that issue, I'm not the author of the measure, but I have joined a measure that would at least deal with the preferential tax treatment that some of these companies get if they have more than 50 rental units, and trying to abate it in that manner. I do know that some localities are looking at types of prohibitions, but they have to obviously pass something that is law-abiding or legal, so they struggle with that. But the other threat is that it just reduces home ownership and increases the number of people who are renting and, when the rent gets too high, needing to move, et cetera. So we would love to also be promoting home ownership. I was happy to secure a significant investment for Milwaukee County. So this is not just the city of Milwaukee, but the surrounding areas, to be able to purchase and rehabilitate foreclosed homes in the area and then make them available to working families at an affordable level. That can't be done solely through the free market, because the purchase price plus the renovations to make it habitable again will result in a sale price that would be above what most working families could afford. And so this is sort of the glue that makes it work. And I've been, but you know, we need to replicate that elsewhere. And I will tell you, almost everywhere I travel in the state when I'm working with business leaders, whether it's manufacturing or other types of businesses, that they have insufficient housing in their communities for the workers they're hoping to attract. And it makes it all the more difficult to get the skilled workforce that they need, because worker housing is lacking. I will give you a shocking story right now. I visited the Coast Guard station in Sturgeon Bay about a year ago with the now Commandant of the Coast Guard. We had an informal gathering with the Coasties who were stationed there. And a woman, and you know Door County, Sturgeon Bay, it's very expensive housing because it's mostly in the, you know, for tourists, et cetera. There was a woman who had 2 children who had set up shop when she was stationed there at Jellystone Campground for the summer while she worked to secure housing. Her kids loved it. They wouldn't have in the winter. But that was really all she could afford as she started. And there was another Coast Guard member who commuted from Green Bay to Sturgeon Bay. But you know, given the hours that they work, that's also in many ways untenable. So those were striking examples of people who serve our country who were not able to easily get the housing they need to do their jobs.
Yeah, so we have to close out. I'm sorry everybody has a question, but our hour is up. But just on that, you know, with interest rates, you know, climbing, we haven't seen interest rates this high, and that's really stopping a lot of action in the home market too. And I'm wondering, you know, and then we just had a spike in inflation reported this week on energy costs. But I'm just wondering, do you think, you know, do you think the Fed's doing the right things, you know, managing how things are going? Because I think we could be reaching a sort of this interest rate thing could start to have even, you know, a deleterious effect on a lot of people.
There's obviously many, many factors in play. What I would say, and I do not sit on the oversight committee for the housing, HUD, Housing and Urban Development. I do sit on a funding subcommittee that deals with rural housing. So the USDA has a big program for rural housing. What I hear at the local level is that some of these programs are too complex and not flexible enough to get the job done. And that's certainly feedback that I share with my colleagues that are in a position to look at it and streamline that. But it is a very difficult time, and I would say the interest rates are certainly exacerbating. But even if they were at their historic lows just a short while ago, I still believe that the development or redevelopment would cost more than a working family could afford in terms of home ownership. And so we have to have partnerships there to resolve the fact that the free market isn't working in that arena too.
Okay, well thank you Senator Baldwin, and thank you sponsors, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you all.